The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock and the faint sound of rain brushing against the window. The night was calm, heavy with the kind of silence that feels alive, as if it's waiting for something to happen. Emily lay on her side, her face half buried in the pillow, eyes open just enough to see the blurry outline of the bedside lamp. She could feel Daniel's presence behind her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the occasional shift of the mattress when he moved. He thought she was asleep. She always made sure he did. Pretending had become her way of avoiding the fragile space between them. The one filled with words neither of them knew how to say anymore. She wasn't sure when it started, this distance that sat between them like a third person in the room. Maybe it was months ago, maybe longer. They still lived under the same roof, still shared meals, still laughed sometimes, but there was something missing, something invisible that used to make everything feel effortless. Love, she thought, shouldn't be this quiet. It used to be loud, bright, full of life. Now it was like a whisper, still there, but fading. Daniel shifted again. She heard the soft rustle of the sheets, then his sigh, deep, tired, the kind of sigh that carries the weight of things unsaid. She wanted to turn around to tell him she was awake, to ask him what he was thinking. But she couldn't. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was exhaustion. The kind that comes when you've tried too long to fix something that keeps breaking in the same place. So she stayed still, pretending to sleep, even as her mind raced. Then, through the dark, his voice broke the silence. It was low and unsteady, like he was talking to himself. "I don't know how to fix us anymore," he said quietly. The words hung in the air for a moment, trembling between them. Emily's breath caught. Her heart began to beat faster, but she didn't move. She wanted to make sure she heard everything. "But I still love you," he continued. "God, I still do." The room felt smaller after that, the air thicker. Emily's eyes stung, but she blinked the tears back. She hadn't heard him say those words in so long. They used to sound easy coming from him in the mornings before work, in little notes he'd leave her, in the way he'd touch her hand without saying anything at all. Lately, though, the words had disappeared, replaced by polite smiles and short conversations about groceries or bills. And yet here he was, whispering love into the dark, thinking she couldn't hear. Her fingers twitched against the sheets, aching to reach for him. But she couldn't move. Something in her wanted to believe this moment was fragile, that if she broke the illusion, if she opened her eyes or spoke, it would vanish. She wanted to hold on to the sound of his voice, to keep it safe in her chest for just a little longer. Outside, the rain grew heavier, tapping against the glass like a soft drum beat. The rhythm seemed to echo her heartbeat. Daniel turned again, and she could feel the faint warmth of his hand hovering near her back, close but not touching. That almost touch hurt more than distance ever could. It reminded her of what they used to be to people who couldn't go a day without reaching for each other. In that moment, memories started to flood her mind. She remembered their first apartment, small, messy, full of laughter. She remembered nights spent watching movies on the floor because they didn't have furniture yet, and how Daniel would always fall asleep halfway through. She remembered how safe it felt back then, how easy love had seemed. Those memories made her chest ache now. Lying next to the same man who once felt like home, but now felt like a stranger she still loved. Daniel spoke again, quieter this time. "I wish you'd tell me what you're thinking," he whispered. His voice cracked slightly, and she knew he wasn't just tired, he was breaking. "I miss you, Em. I miss us." That was it. The words she'd been waiting to hear. The ones that told her he felt it too. The slow unraveling. The quiet loss. The fear of letting go. She bit her lip hard, trying to keep from making a sound. Her throat ached from holding back. She wanted to tell him she missed him too, that she never stopped loving him, that she was just scared of saying the wrong thing again. But something inside her said, not yet. Not tonight. He sighed again, longer this time, then went still. The only sound left was the rain, steady and forgiving. She listened to his breathing, slowed down, unsure if he'd fallen asleep or just given up on speaking. Her heart felt heavy, full of love that had nowhere to go. Emily turned slightly, careful not to let the mattress creak. She looked at his back, familiar, strong, the same one she'd leaned against countless times before. There was comfort in just seeing him there, even in the silence. She reached out slowly, her hand hovering a few inches above him, but she stopped. Her fingers curled back. She wasn't ready yet. Not to break the stillness, not to risk another misunderstanding. So she lay back down and closed her eyes, pretending again. Pretending she was asleep, pretending she was fine. Pretending she didn't just hear the words that could have changed everything. But deep inside, something shifted. His quiet confession had cracked something open in her, not pain, but hope. Fragile, uncertain hope. Maybe there was still something left between them, something worth saving. As she drifted between thought and sleep, Emily realized that love doesn't always end with shouting or anger. Sometimes it fades quietly, waiting for one small moment of truth to bring it back. Tonight had given her that moment. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing: she wouldn't pretend forever. The rain began to ease, the air lighter now. The clock ticked softly in the background, marking the end of another day that had started like all the others, but hadn't ended the same. Daniel was still beside her, unaware that his whispered words had reached her heart more deeply than anything he'd said in years. And as Emily finally closed her eyes for real this time, she thought, he was sure that I was sleeping. But I was just pretending. And for the first time in a long while, the truth didn't scare her. It felt like the beginning of something fragile, uncertain, but real. The morning light slipped through the curtains, painting the room in quiet gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind that soft stillness that only comes after rain. Emily woke before Daniel, her eyes heavy but her mind already spinning. She stared at the ceiling for a long time, thinking about his words from the night before, the ones he didn't know she'd heard. "I still love you. I miss us." They echoed in her chest like a song she couldn't turn off. She turned her head and looked at him sleeping beside her. His face looked peaceful, younger even, without the weight of all their unspoken worries. She wanted to reach out, trace the familiar lines of his face, whisper that she still loved him too. But she didn't. Instead, she slipped quietly out of bed, wrapping herself in her robe and heading to the kitchen. She needed space to think, to breathe, to find the courage to say the things she'd been holding inside. The coffee machine hummed softly as she stared out the window. The sky was clearing, but the world still looked wet and new. She took a sip of her coffee, its warmth doing little to calm the storm inside her. So many mornings had started like this, quiet, simple, ordinary, but everything felt different now. There was something fragile about this silence. Like one wrong word could make everything fall apart. Daniel appeared a few minutes later, still half asleep, running a hand through his messy hair. "Morning," he murmured, his voice rough from sleep. "Morning," she replied, forcing a small smile. He poured himself coffee, sat down across from her, and for a moment they just stared at their mugs, both wanting to speak, neither knowing how to start. The air between them was full of things left unsaid. "You didn't sleep much," he said finally, glancing up. "Neither did you," she answered softly. He smiled, just barely. And it hit her how much she'd missed that, the small, effortless connection they used to have. There was a time when that smile could erase a bad day. Now it only reminded her of what they were trying so hard not to lose. Daniel set his cup down and leaned back in his chair. "Work's been crazy lately," he said. It was a safe topic, the kind they both used when they didn't know what else to say. "Yeah," she replied. "I know." The words hung there, simple but empty. She hated how they'd become experts at small talk to people who used to share everything, now struggling to find anything that felt real. She thought about last night, about how raw his voice had sounded when he confessed he didn't know how to fix them. She wanted to tell him that hearing those words had made her heart ache and hope all at once. But what if saying it out loud ruined the fragile calm between them? What if it made things worse? So she said nothing. Daniel finished his coffee and stood up, heading toward the sink. "I might be late tonight," he said quietly. "There's a meeting?" "'Kay," she replied, though a part of her wished he'd stay. He lingered by the door for a moment, keys in hand. "Do you want to go out this weekend? Maybe dinner somewhere?" he asked, his tone careful, uncertain. The morning light slipped through the curtains, painting the room in quiet gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind that soft stillness that only comes after rain. Emily woke before Daniel, her eyes heavy, but her mind already spinning. She stared at the ceiling for a long time, thinking about his words from the night before, the ones he didn't know she'd heard. "I still love you. I miss us." They echoed in her chest like a song she couldn't turn off. She turned her head and looked at him sleeping beside her. His face looked peaceful, younger even, without the weight of all their unspoken worries. She wanted to reach out, trace the familiar lines of his face, whisper that she still loved him too. But she didn't. Instead, she slipped quietly out of bed, wrapping herself in her robe and heading to the kitchen. She needed space to think, to breathe, to find the courage to say the things she'd been holding inside. The coffee machine hummed softly as she stared out the window. The sky was clearing, but the world still looked wet and new. She took a sip of her coffee, its warmth doing little to calm the storm inside her. So many mornings had started like this, quiet, simple, ordinary, but everything felt different now. There was something fragile about this silence. Like one wrong word could make everything fall apart. Daniel appeared a few minutes later, still half asleep, running a hand through his messy hair. "Morning," he murmured, his voice rough from sleep. "Morning," she replied, forcing a small smile. He poured himself coffee, sat down across from her, and for a moment they just stared at their mugs, both wanting to speak, neither knowing how to start. The air between them was full of things left unsaid. "You didn't sleep much," he said finally, glancing up. "Neither did you," she answered softly. He smiled, just barely. And it hit her how much she'd missed that, the small, effortless connection they used to have. There was a time when that smile could erase a bad day. Now it only reminded her of what they were trying so hard not to lose. Daniel set his cup down and leaned back in his chair. "Work's been crazy lately," he said. It was a safe topic, the kind they both used when they didn't know what else to say. "Yeah," she replied. "I know." The words hung there, simple but empty. She hated how they'd become experts at small talk to people who used to share everything, now struggling to find anything that felt real. She thought about last night, about how raw his voice had sounded when he confessed he didn't know how to fix them. She wanted to tell him that hearing those words had made her heart ache and hope all at once. But what if saying it out loud ruined the fragile calm between them? What if it made things worse? So she said nothing. Daniel finished his coffee and stood up, heading toward the sink. "I might be late tonight," he said quietly. "There's a meeting." "'Kay?" she replied, though a part of her wished he'd stay. He lingered by the door for a moment, keys in hand. "Do you want to go out this weekend? Maybe dinner somewhere?" he asked, his tone careful, uncertain. The next few days passed quietly. But something between them had changed. Not completely, but just enough to feel it. The silence wasn't as heavy, and the air in the house no longer felt cold. Emily noticed the small things first. Daniel's voice sounded softer when he spoke to her. And he'd started looking at her longer than before, like he was trying to remember who they used to be. They weren't fixed, not even close, but for the first time in months, they weren't falling apart either. It was Friday evening when he came home early, surprising her. The sun was setting outside, painting the sky in soft orange light. Emily was standing by the window, lost in thought when she heard the front door open. Daniel walked in carrying a brown paper bag. His hair was messy from the wind, and he had that unsure half smile she remembered from years ago, the one that showed up when he wasn't sure what to say. "I stopped by that bakery you like," he said, lifting the bag slightly. "They had those little chocolate pastries you used to love." Her heart warmed at that. It had been ages since he'd brought her something just because he thought of her. "You remembered," she said softly. "Of course I did," he replied, setting the bag on the counter. "You always said they tasted like happiness." She laughed, a small, genuine sound, and he smiled, looking relieved. They stood there for a moment, just smiling at each other like strangers, rediscovering something familiar. Then he said, "You want to eat outside? It's nice out." Emily nodded. "Sure." They carried the pastries and 2 cups of tea out to the porch. The air was cool and fresh after days of rain. The street was quiet, and the faint smell of wet grass filled the evening. They sat side by side on the old wooden steps, sharing bites of the flaky pastries that melted in their mouths. The sweetness lingered, reminding them of easier times. For a long while, neither spoke. But it wasn't the bad kind of silence. It was comfortable, easy. The kind that didn't need to be filled. Emily watched the sunset fade into soft shades of pink and purple, the sky slowly giving way to twilight. She felt Daniel's shoulder brush against hers and didn't move away. "You ever think about when we first met?" he asked suddenly, his voice breaking the quiet. She smiled. "All the time." He chuckled softly. "You were sitting in that coffee shop downtown pretending to read a book, but actually people watching." Her eyes widened. "You noticed that?" "I noticed everything," he said. "You were wearing that blue sweater and you kept tucking your hair behind your ear every few seconds. I thought you looked nervous." "I was," she admitted, laughing a little. "It was my first day in the city. I didn't know anyone." "I know," he said. "That's why I sat next to you. You looked like you needed someone to talk to." She turned toward him, meeting his eyes. There was warmth there, the kind of warmth that came from remembering the start of something beautiful. "You were so confident back then," she said. "You just started talking like we'd known each other forever." He grinned faintly. "Maybe that's because it felt like I had." For a moment, they both fell quiet again. The past hung between them, not as a wound, but as a reminder of how much they'd shared, how much they'd built together. The world around them seemed to pause, giving them space to breathe. Then Daniel's voice grew softer. I don't want to lose this," he said, "even if it feels like we already have." Her heart squeezed. She had waited for him to say something like that for so long. She wanted to reach for him, to tell him she'd been waiting to hear it. But her throat tightened and the words wouldn't come out. "I heard you last night," she wanted to say, "when you thought I was sleeping," but she stayed quiet. The timing didn't feel right yet. The moment felt too delicate to risk. The sky deepened into night, the first stars appearing above them. A breeze moved through the trees, and for a second, Emily imagined they were back in time, younger, braver, untouched by distance. She could almost see the versions of themselves that had stood here years ago, laughing about nothing, believing that love alone could fix anything. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, nervous now. "I keep thinking about when we used to drive out to the lake after work," he said. "You'd fall asleep with your head against the window, and I'd try to stay quiet so I wouldn't wake you." She smiled faintly. "You always played that same song on repeat." He laughed softly. "You hated it." "No," she said. "I didn't. I just pretended to because I wanted you to change the station. But I actually liked it." He turned to look at her, surprised. "You did?" "Yeah," she said. "It reminded me of us." Something in his expression shifted softer, gentler. He reached out then, not boldly, but with quiet intention, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear just like he used to. His touch was careful, almost reverent. For the first time in months, she didn't flinch. "Emily," he said, voice low, "I still love you. I know I've messed things up. I stopped saying it, stopped showing it, and I hate that. But I still feel it. Every day." Her heart beat faster. It wasn't the first time he'd said those words. She'd heard them whispered in the dark just nights ago. But hearing them now, face to face, felt different. It was real this time, raw and honest. She looked away, blinking back tears. "You don't have to say that just because we're remembering the past," she said quietly. "I'm not," he replied. "I'm saying it because I don't want to keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. I miss being close to you. I miss how it felt to know what you were thinking before you even said it." Her eyes softened. "I miss that too." The rain started again, light, steady, almost like it was listening in. They both turned toward the sound, watching the droplets glisten under the porch light. It felt poetic somehow, like the world was washing away the distance that had built between them. Daniel stood up and reached for her hand. She hesitated, then took it. His hand was warm, familiar, grounding. They stood there together in the gentle rain, saying nothing, just breathing in the moment. For the first time in a long while, it didn't feel awkward. It felt right when they went back inside. The smell of pastries still lingered in the kitchen. The candle she'd lit earlier had burned down halfway. Everything felt peaceful, fragile, yes, but peaceful. She looked at Daniel, standing there with damp hair and tired eyes, and thought, this is what love looks like when it's learning to survive. The rain hadn't stopped since evening, falling in a slow, steady rhythm that filled the quiet house with a gentle hum. The lights were dim, and the scent of coffee still lingered from earlier. Emily sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, a blanket draped loosely over her shoulders. The day had been long, but her mind was wide awake. Daniel was upstairs finishing some work. And every few minutes she could hear him moving footsteps, drawers closing, the faint sound of papers shifting. It felt like the calm before something she couldn't quite name. She glanced toward the window. The street outside glistened under the lamplight, and puddles mirrored the faint glow of passing cars. There was something soothing about it, something that reminded her of how much time had passed. Not just hours or days, but moments. Moments that had quietly built the distance between them, and moments that, lately, had started stitching them back together when Daniel came downstairs. He looked tired but lighter, like some of the weight he'd been carrying had started to fall away. He hesitated near the doorway, watching her. "You're still up?" he asked softly. "Yeah," she said, pulling the blanket closer. "Couldn't sleep." He nodded, then crossed the room and sat beside her. The couch dipped slightly under his weight, and the space between them felt both too small and too big at once. The sound of the rain filled the silence, steady and forgiving. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel said, "I've been thinking about what we talked about last night." Emily turned to him. "About what?" "About us," he said. His voice was quiet but firm. "About how we used to be. How we drifted. I don't want to keep pretending we're fine when we both know we're not." Her heart tightened. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the one she'd been afraid of and longing for all at once. "I don't want to pretend anymore either," she said. He looked at her, his eyes searching. "Then let's stop pretending." The words hit her like a rush of air, both freeing and terrifying. She looked down at her hands, twisting the edge of the blanket between her fingers. "It's not that I stopped loving you," she said quietly. "I just didn't know how to reach you anymore." Daniel exhaled deeply. "I know. I felt it too. I kept thinking if I just stayed quiet, maybe we'd go back to how we were. But silence doesn't fix anything," she said, shaking her head. "It only makes the distance grow." He nodded slowly, his eyes softening. "Emily, I've been meaning to tell you something. That night a few weeks ago, I thought you were asleep. I said some things I didn't mean for you to hear." Her breath caught. There it was, the moment she'd been waiting for. She felt her pulse quicken, but she didn't interrupt. "I just needed to say them out loud," he continued. "I said I still loved you, that I didn't know how to fix us. And I meant it. I still do." She looked up then, meeting his gaze. His expression was open, raw, the kind of honesty that left no room for hiding. Her lips parted, but for a second, no sound came out. Then finally, softly, she said, "I wasn't sleeping, Daniel." He froze. His eyes widened slightly, confusion flickering before it melted into realization. "You heard me?" "Yes," she whispered. "Every word." He blinked, unsure whether to feel embarrassed or relieved. "Then why didn't you say anything?" She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Because I needed to know you still meant it, even when you thought I couldn't hear you. I needed to know that what you said was real, not because I asked. Not because you felt like you had to, but because it was the truth." Oh, Daniel looked at her, his face softening in a way she hadn't seen in so long. The tension in his shoulders seemed to ease, and for a moment he didn't say anything. Then he reached for her hand. "It was real," he said simply. "Every word." Her fingers trembled slightly as he held them, the warmth of his hand steady against hers. "I wanted to tell you that night," she said, "but I was scared. Scared of saying something that might make it worse." He shook his head gently. You could never make it worse by being honest. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. Then maybe it's time we both stop being scared, she said. He nodded. Yeah, I think it's time. The rain continued its soft rhythm against the window. And the room felt smaller now, not in a trapped way, but in a safe one. The kind of closeness that comes when walls finally begin to fall. Daniel leaned back slightly, studying her face as though he was memorizing it all over again. You know, he said, his voice quiet, I've missed talking like this. Just being real with you. I've missed it too, she admitted. I didn't realize how much until now. He smiled then, not the polite kind, but the one that reached his eyes. Maybe this is where we start again. Emily's heart softened. Do you really think we can? I think we already are, he said. They sat in silence for a while, letting the words settle between them. It wasn't a perfect ending or a grand moment, just a people trying again, quietly, honestly. But sometimes that's what love needs most, not fireworks or promises. It's just truth. After a moment, Daniel stood and walked over to the window. The rain's slowing down, he said. Want to step outside for a bit? She hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I'd like that. They stepped out onto the porch, the air cool and fresh. The rain had faded to a soft drizzle, and the world smelled new again. Streetlights shimmered in puddles, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Emily pulled her sweater tighter, and Daniel draped his jacket over her shoulders without saying anything. For a moment, they stood there quietly, listening to the soft hum of the night. Then she turned to him. Do you remember the first time it rained after we moved here? He smiled. You ran outside barefoot? You thought I was crazy? She said, laughing softly. I did, he admitted. But you looked happy. I hadn't seen anyone smile at the rain like that before. She looked out at the wet street, her voice tender. Maybe we both forgot how to smile at the rain. He reached for her hand again, and this time she didn't hesitate. Their fingers intertwined naturally, like they had 1,000 times before. Then, let's remember, he said, and there it was, not a grand declaration. Not a promise carved in stone, but something real. Something gentle. Something that felt like healing. When they went back inside, Emily glanced around the room. It looked the same as always. Same couch, same dim lamp, same quiet hum. Yet everything felt different. The air seemed lighter, the silence softer, as she sat back down beside Daniel. She thought about how love doesn't always need to be loud to survive. Sometimes it's found in the smallest moments, in the quiet truths. The brave confessions, the simple act of staying. He looked at her, eyes warm, and whispered, I'm glad you weren't sleeping. She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. So am I. Outside, the last drops of rain faded into stillness. And the night wrapped around them, peaceful, forgiving, and full of quiet hope. Asterisk.